Welcome everyone to the SciManDan podcast, the place where science and conspiracy collide. We're on episode 15. I can't quite believe we're 15 episodes in, but unfortunately, Katz can't make it again. He is again absent. I'm joking. He's fine. He's doing real life stuff. He's doing his actual job. So what we'll do is we'll get our guest on ASAP. So joining us this week is a PhD coral reef scientist working out of the Global Change Institute in Queensland, scuba instructor and fellow Brit, Emma Kennedy. Welcome and thank you for joining us. You okay?
Yeah, hi Dan. Thank you so much for having me. Hi everybody.
That's okay. A pleasure to have you on. So how's it going with the pandemic over there actually? Because it's quite good in Australia, isn't it?
Yeah, we've been really lucky actually. I think our total number of infections and deaths are less than some days in the UK over the whole year. So, and particularly up here in Queensland, we really haven't seen many cases. So we're feeling very lucky.
Yeah, I bet. Because I expect you're abreast of all the stuff going over here, aren't you? Because you're from here originally, aren't you?
My family all from London. Yeah, so they're all locked down at the moment. So I'm really feeling for all of you guys. I wish I could just, whisk you away for a day and take you to the reef. Just have a day off.
That'd be
Forget about it all.
None of that for the moment.
No, but the end's in sight, right? The vaccination program.
It is
amazing
in sight,
over there, super efficient.
Yeah, we have done one on
you
that
guys
front.
are going through the worst of it.
Yeah. So Emma, you're a coral reef scientist, but can you tell us a bit about what your job involves day to day?
Yeah, so I'm an ecologist, which ecology is the study of plants and animals and kind of how they interact with each other and also the environment. And because I'm a coral reef specialist, the animals and plants I'm interested in are mainly corals and seaweeds and fish. So kind of who they are, where they are, what they're all doing, how they're all interacting with each other. And then I'm kind of interested in how they interact with the environment as well. So the quality of the seawater, the temperature of it, and just kind of working out how changes in the seawater affect all of those organisms and how they're interacting. And so it's a bit like being a detective, and to do that, it means I have to spend a lot of time in the water. So, I mean, ecologists do lots of different things. Some of them make models to simulate how all these animals interact. But I'm a field ecologist, which means I'll spend maybe up to 6 months, a year, on the ocean, in the ocean, just making really detailed observations about animals and plants under there and how they're behaving and changing. And then when I'm not scuba diving, I'll be back in the office and looking for patterns in the data to try and understand what's happening and why.
Cool. It sounds awesome. I mean, you just got back from a trip, haven't you? Monitoring the coral reef. What did you do there?
Yeah, so I was working for the Australian Institute of Marine Science, which has one of the best and longest running monitoring programs on the planet. But they're focused on monitoring reefs, mainly on the Great Barrier Reef. So for over 30 years, they've had teams of scientists go out and return to the same reefs every single year to look at what's been happening and what's changing. And so we pick up things like new threats to the reef, like coral starfish that eat the corals, coral disease, and look at how a lot of the Great Barrier Reef is in national parks. So look how different zones of the national parks are affecting the health of the reef. So yeah, it was really fun to be out there in the field. We do one of the monitoring techniques we use, the survey techniques, is called manta towing, where you get dragged on a rope behind a boat over kilometers and kilometers of reef so you can look out for any big changes, which is a really, really fun way to see lots of reef.
How fast do you go when you do
you
that?
feel a little bit like shark bait.
Yeah, how fast do you go?
No faster than about 2 knots. So it's not super fast when you're on the boat, but when you're getting dragged behind, it's a bit like wakeboarding. You want to cover a lot of area, in a pretty fast time. So it feels pretty fast when you're getting dragged along behind.
Yeah, I bet. Whenever I watch the programs here at home, like the David Attenborough stuff like that, I always love the episodes involving the shallow seas and the corals and stuff like that. Given they're such enormous organisms, what's your take on how important they are for the local ecosystem as a whole?
That's a really good question. I think one thing to wrap your head around is like reefs themselves aren't organisms as such, but they're obviously created like by organisms, just like trees make like woods.
Sure, yeah.
So they create these stony skeletal structures, but they grow enormous. Like you're right, completely like over thousands of years, they'll build these structures that are like bigger than cities, and so those cities, of course, are really important because they create like a habitat for lots of other organisms, so worms, fish, crabs, lobsters, and so you'll need the corals to keep creating these structures in the same way as you need trees to create habitat for animals as well. Like without, they're completely important. Without them being there and being able to create that structure, you wouldn't have all that biology. But they're also not just important from a biological perspective, but also from a human one. So we know that like the reefs end up generating lots of sand as well, which replenishes sandy beaches.
Oh, wow.
And the reefs help protect coastlines as well and keep them healthy. So big storms that are coming in and huge tidal waves get dissipated if they hit a reef before they hit your village. So in the Philippines, we know there's about 12 million people's homes that are directly protected by having reefs there. And then, of course, they support huge amounts of fish as well. And there's lots of people worldwide that actually rely on those fish. Like here in Australia, the reef's really, really important for tourism income for Australians here in Queensland as well. And so there's an estimated, I think it's like 500 million people, 500 million people that rely directly on coral reefs for like either their food or their job. And so the loss of reefs isn't really just a biological like catastrophe. It's kind of like a looming humanitarian crisis as well, which is what people don't often think about, the kind of human element of how important reefs are.
No, they don't at all. Like I was going to say, are they good indicators of climate change, coral reefs? Like, because they're affected so much.
They're often said to be, what do they call it, like the canary in the coal mine, that the corals themselves are pretty sensitive to temperature.
Sure.
And so they've been a pretty good indicator of changing seawater temperatures. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm often saddened by the pictures of the bleaching and things like that. Is that an irreversible thing, or can reefs recover from that? I mean, do you want to explain a bit about what it is first, and then if they can or not?
I'm really sorry to hear that, because I totally feel for you. It's really sad to see, especially because coral reefs are so kind of vibrant and colorful.
Yeah.
And so coral bleaching is when the corals suddenly all go white, and they basically go like that when they're really stressed. And it's sometimes, like most of the time, it's to do with like a big change in temperature in the water that they're living in. Pollution too can make them bleach, and they're basically losing the color from their like skin, from their tissues. And the color in there is caused by like tiny, tiny microscopic algae that they have like buried inside of their tissues. So they're one of the only animals that will photosynthesize, because they have this symbiotic relationship with the algae inside them. And it's a really clever trick, because they use these algae to harvest lots of energy from the sun and help them grow. And so if the algae leave, they lose this kind of like lovely golden brown color that they have, and they look white because you can see the skeleton underneath. They're still actually alive at that point, but if the algae don't return over a period of like days to weeks, the corals basically starve to death, and then eventually the reef will go from all white to kind of like brown. So the skeletons eventually just like start to rot, and everything rots and goes this disgusting brown color. So it looks quite spectacular when it's all white. And they can sometimes bleach and then recover if you don't have a heat wave that lasts too long, if it's just for a few days.
Okay.
But it's kind of like prolonged heat waves that last for weeks, which tends to knock out a lot of corals. And then your question about them is like whether it's irreversible, like long term. So if the corals like don't get their algae back and they go on to die and start to rot, I guess the best way to think of it is a little bit like a forest fire. So a forest fire passing through a forest will totally destroy the forest, and it'll look absolutely horrible, and the forest can recover, but to look like it did before, it might take kind of 5 to 15 years for all the trees to regrow, and
Wow.
it's pretty much exactly the same for a reef. Anything between kind of 5 and 20 years for that reef to start to replenish. The only problem is really with that recovery is if fires continue to keep sweeping through
Yeah.
a forest, and it can never get a chance to reestablish. And it's the same with the reefs. Like, they need that 5 to 15 years to remain cool. And if you had another big heat wave, then the young corals that are starting to come back and like reseed that reef would be impacted, and the reef wouldn't get a chance to recover. And that's kind of what we're starting to see now, which is quite scary.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually, with that kind of connection with the forest. It's a good way of kind of putting it so that people can understand it. Am I right in saying that with where you mentioned about the heat waves, the longer heat waves, the climate change isn't the fact that it's just getting warmer and that's what's going on. It's more like these heat waves are coming more, they're coming more often and they're longer, and that's the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're like, yeah, I think the thing that people sometimes struggle to wrap their head around with climate change is it's not this sort of really slow, like incremental,
Yeah.
like change. You're just suddenly seeing like, crazy weird weather events, or more heat waves, or more prolonged heat waves in areas. And that doesn't really give like the corals a lot of time to adjust. They basically just kind of get cooked. But
Yeah.
so we had a huge one in 2016, which really did a lot of damage to the Great Barrier Reef. And I think it was like the hottest year on record in Australia that year, and the ocean was also really, really warm. So yeah, not pleasant for anybody.
Has that been the worst one recently, that 2016 one?
Yeah, so 2016 was like incredibly severe because the heat was like high, and it was like for a very prolonged time.
Okay.
And it really damaged particularly large sectors of the northern part of the Great Barrier Reef. But what was really scary for scientists is we hadn't ever seen before 2 heat waves in a row. And what we saw in 2017 was the heat come back again. And that was scary to see, because previously, like, the last mass bleaching events had been a few years in between each one, which allowed stuff to kind of start to recover. So yeah, 2016 was a really severe one. 2017 affected more the sort of central part of the Great Barrier Reef. And then we actually last year, around exactly this time last year, just when COVID was kind of kicking off, we saw another one. So March 2020, and that really sadly affected the southern part of the reef that had managed to escape the first 2. And it was really frustrating because we were starting to get locked down, and so we all wanted to get out to our reefs and check on them and see how they were doing, and we weren't really able to at the time. We're just trying to work out what the damage was now that we're allowed to go back out on field work.
So when you're out in the field, then have you ever come across like some large area of destruction because of that?
Yeah, so I took a team up to the far northern section of the reef just after 2016, like, to survey the damage. So we were going up, not when it was all looking really spectacular and white. We were going up to see, like, after that really like hot period, how much had survived and like managed to go back to colors, or how much has started to rot. And at the time we were using these really cool underwater kind of scooters. So the Google Street View cameras.
Oh yeah.
That like drive around. Yeah, so they help. Google helped develop with the University of Queensland the surveys called the Seaview survey. It's kind of like an underwater scooter, so that we could survey much larger areas than you normally can on scuba. So like a couple of kilometers at a time. And so we did this big kind of, it almost felt like a motorbike road trip, like right up the northern section of the Great Barrier Reef to assess the damage. And it was really tough because there's a team of 5 of us, and every day it was just like kilometers and kilometers of just really brown, like grim looking reef. It just kind of looked like car park. It didn't look like how you think a reef should look, and it was really hard to keep everybody's spirits up on the boat. And it was just the scale of it was like very, very large. So the Great Barrier Reef is bigger than the UK or about the same size as the UK. And you can just imagine driving for days and days and days and just seeing kind of scorched country. It got you down after a while. It was, scary to kind of get your head around the scale of it.
One of the things I noticed from our original email exchange was you had a footnote on there which had the current atmospheric carbon and how it's changed month from month. Is that a fluctuation throughout the year, or is that a constant slow rise, that atmospheric carbon?
Oh, that's so cool that you noticed that.
Yeah.
I said that because, like, it's just hard to get a sense of, like, climate change can be quite hard to get your head around.
Yeah.
And get a sense of what's happening to our planet, like a kind of weather report. So in Hawaii, there's this big old volcano called Mauna Loa, and on the top they've got an observatory where they measure atmospheric carbon dioxide, and I think they've been doing it since the 1950s, like on a daily basis. And so that's a really good question about the fluctuation. You're completely right. You can go and Google Mauna Loa, like observation CO2, and you should be able to find the site. And if you go there, you'll see that the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere follow this kind of zigzaggy line because carbon dioxide does fluctuate through the year because you have these big seasonal cycles, mainly driven by like plant growth, the plants pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, and a lot dissolves in water as well, but oceans as well as absorbing lots, release lots as well. It doesn't stay there permanently. So there's this kind of flux all the time. Then like living organisms are respiring all the time. Even us, we're just breathing out carbon dioxide all the time. I don't think we're having that much of a big impact, but soils and things like that with all the biomass in there. And so you do see these kind of annual fluxes. I think it's kind of like higher in kind of springtime in the Northern Hemisphere and then lower in September. But then on top of that zigzaggy line, if you look at the overall trend, if you kind of zoom right back out and see what's been happening between 1950s and today, you'll see just this really steep increase. But you're right, it's not steady throughout the year. And I guess that's what my job is as kind of an ecologist, is like looking at those overall big trends in patterns and not getting confused by all the little like noise going on.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting, the whole climate change debate. I mean, Katz, who normally does the co-hosting with me, we as you know, we spend our time on YouTube trying to debunk conspiracy theories and things like that using science. Climate change isn't something we've really touched on yet, either of us. Are there any serious climate change deniers out there in the world of YouTube who are quite big? Or do you know of any?
I think you're the expert here. I think you probably know more about them. It's funny because I think like in my little world of coral reef science and the science community that I'm kind of interacting with on a daily basis, for most of us, there hasn't even really been any question about whether it's happening or not. For over 30 years, we've become much more focused on, okay, like what are we going to do about it? What are the solutions? And like on a daily basis in like our working lives, that's what we're thinking about. So we're sometimes like a bit out of touch, I think, scientists, with like how much confusion there is out there. Like I think I've seen you debunking some pretty crazy theories out there, but on the other hand, I do think that the majority of people out there are pretty smart and like do understand climate change and can see things happening like in their own backyards and their own cities. So there was a poll, I think just a month ago, of about 1.2 million people. It was run by Oxford University from across 50 countries. And it showed about 80% of people didn't just accept the science on climate change, but they were actually really concerned about climate change and wanted to see some action to tackle it. And so I think, perhaps 10 years ago, it was, I don't know, more acceptable to air those kind of beliefs. And I'm sure there are still people, like mischievous people out there and troublemakers spreading misinformation. And I guess new ideas sometimes do take time to take root. But I defer to you though. You're the expert on who's out there spreading misinformation.
Maybe it's because of the world I'm in, and I see a lot of people who are anti science and just want to go against the grain of everything that science says. But like I said, we haven't really looked at climate change. I know. So if we went looking for these people, I'm sure we'd find a huge amount on YouTube. But I still, it is quite a touchy subject, and that's again maybe because of the people that visit my channel or whatever. So you haven't had any experience at all with any people who aren't convinced it's real?
No, you're completely right. Like I definitely have, like from like even people in my own family to
Oh wow!
like you'll jump in Uber and have a debate with an
Oh
Uber
cool.
driver over it. And I think here in Australia, you were talking about crazy YouTubers, but like some of our Australian politicians have some quite like out there views. And I think that's the thing that's really scary when your leadership are kind of buying into some of these quite wacky ideas. So
Yeah.
actually, our own Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, 4 years ago, while he was Treasurer, before he became Prime Minister, brought a lump of coal into Parliament and like flung it around and was kind of like, there's nothing to be scared of.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think that's the kind of thing that's scary when it's people in positions of power that like really don't understand the science or why it's important. And yeah, I find it crazy because I wouldn't ever tell my doctor what's wrong with me or try and explain to a lawyer about law. And all we're trying to do
Yeah.
is share our science and explain what's going on. But yeah, I guess it's hard to know as a scientist. We're so busy trying to capture information and understand the trends and like work on really good state of the art science. It's like, how much time do we have to try and focus on bringing some of these people along with us? I used to think, and there's almost a little bit of a debate within coral reef science that came up maybe about 8 or 10 years ago when the reefs really all started dying. And the old school members of the scientific community are really like, well, it's not our job to go out there and advocate and tell people about it. Our job is to keep our like heads down and be really objective and just collect data and share it, and people can make up their own minds. But actually, when the ecosystem that you love is disappearing, I think the younger generation of scientists coming through are like, well, actually communicating our science and how it works and what it means is important, because you need to bring everybody along with you. Because if people don't understand what's happening and it's really scary and it's going to affect people's lives, that's our responsibility to go out there and tell people about it.
Yeah. It's funny you said about that poll, actually. Last week we had a guy on who is like a space, he writes space newsletters and he broadcasts space news and stuff like that. And I brought up a poll with him about what the American public, what they think that space travel should be used for in the future. And going to Mars and going to Moon were at the bottom of the list. And funny enough, studying the climate was, I think, first or second. So using our space technologies to study climate and make sure everything's okay on that front was first or second, which I think was quite admirable.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's because people care.
Yeah.
And I think, especially with COVID, like a lot of people, like it's just made them realize what's important in their lives. And for a lot of people, nature and green spaces and having like a healthy, unpolluted environment to like move around in is important. And we had those horrible bushfires last year in Australia. I don't know if you saw that. There are people losing their homes. We've had huge droughts over here. So it's really starting to affect people's livelihoods and lives. And our neighbors in the Pacific are all worried about like rising sea levels. So no, it's I think it's really the global consciousness is something that's really, and that's reflected in things like the Paris Climate Agreement, right? That it's just like most governments are like, this is a problem, we need to collaborate and figure a way forward for us all.
It's funny you mentioned again the Prime Minister in Australia who came into the Parliament. One of the funniest and yet equally disturbing things I've ever seen was a congressman in America taking a snowball into the House of Representatives to show that climate change isn't happening. Is that the craziest thing you've seen?
What's that?
Is that the craziest thing you've seen? Something doing something like that? I couldn't believe it personally.
Yeah, I think stuff like that is, it's like it's pretty wacky. Hey, it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of farcical.
I know. It's like in Texas recently. They had some really bad snow in Texas, and people apparently. I mean, I don't know how real this is, but apparently they're trying to burn the snow to show that it's fake.
Oh, you're joking.
Yeah, I mean,
no, that's real. Oh, yeah, no, that's real. Yeah, that's really. It's like it's half funny and half
I know.
like
It's sad,
just
isn't
really.
it? It is
Yeah.
really sad.
Yeah, a little bit sad. Yeah, yeah, and I guess I mean, maybe that is another job for the scientists to communicate better because, of course, we call it planetary warming, and the whole planet is getting warmer, but the consequences of the warming doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be getting hotter where you are.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that's scary. Like we've had a lot of flooding events like here up in like North Queensland where I live, and like a lot of cyclones as well, and these huge crazy snowstorms, all of these like odd weather events all linked to changing patterns.
Yeah,
but
that's it,
understanding that, I guess it can be tricky, and it's about just keep chatting to each other. And I think that's why what you're doing is so exciting and so cool, to just actually get to the bottom of the science and ask those kind of questions and talk to people about it and keep us all talking and keep us on our toes, because that's the only way that we're going to just communicating well is going to be the only way that we're going to like all come together around this. And we kind of need everybody to be on board to make these really big changes.
Yeah, definitely. We need to. We had a good chat with Professor Emma Kennedy about it, about trying to improve the general scientific understanding amongst the general public, especially with like recently with things like the vaccine, and because it was brought out so quickly, people were doubting it and things like that. But obviously, if you look into it, and it's quite plausible.
Yeah. Yes, but it's a lot to do with like journalistic integrity as well, right? If there's like media that are not telling the stories properly or putting out misinformation, like I can understand why it gets really confusing for people about like, who's telling the truth and who's not, like figuring that out.
Yeah,
it's tricky.
Completely agree. But talking of telling the truth, it's time for Guess the Conspiracy.
Okay.
So this is the part of the show where normally Katz is with me, and we've both come up with a fake conspiracy theory. So it's one that both Katz and I have fabricated, and we're going to try and get you to pick out of 3 one conspiracy that is real, in that people actually believe it, and out of the 2 that Katz and I have made up. Okay.
Okay, I'm super gullible, so I reckon I'm going to be terrible at it.
Okay,
Go.
well,
yeah.
It's currently 8-4 to me and Kat, so the guests have only got 4 points. So you've got some pressure here to put it back for the guests. Right, here we go. So number 1, when the NHS prescribes exercise to the elderly, it is deliberately done so to induce a heart attack to control the population. That's the first conspiracy. Number 2, global warming will be solved when we find Earth's secret thermostat, which is hidden at the entrance to a secret cave system in the North Pole. That's conspiracy number 2. And number 3, birds are nothing more than surveillance devices for an alien race.
Oh, I love it. 3, I love the birds one. That's hilarious.
So which one is real? Tricky. Which one is real in that people actually believe it?
In that people believe.
The other 2 completely.
They're also out there.
They are.
And you've made up 2 of them.
Yes, we have.
I wish the thermostat one was true. Wouldn't that be easy? Just if all we had to do was find the thermostat and everything was going to be okay, and my beautiful reefs were going to be okay. I'm going to go. I really like the 3rd one. I'm going to go for number 3. I reckon. I don't know. Those birds, they're suspicious.
Okay, so you're going for the birds are nothing more than surveillance devices for an alien race.
Yeah, I reckon that's what those birds are up to.
Okay, here we go.
Definitely.
Well done. You've done it. You've correctly guessed the real conspiracy. That is the real conspiracy theory that people believe.
Please tell me, where did that originate from? Is that in the UK? Or is that I think Australia?
The more I've seen are ones in the US for people that believe that sort of thing. But it's like flat earthers. There's conspiracy theorists everywhere. I think, hang on a sec, I went through a whole episode without talking about flat Earth. That's incredible. The NHS one was one that Kat's made up, and I made up the one about global warming. It was a play on the hollow. Do you know about the hollow Earth theory?
No, tell me.
So the hollow Earth theory is that there's two like holes in the poles which are hidden, which is a way to get inside the hollow Earth. So it's kind of a play on that one.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Not heard of the hollow Earth?
There's a film where they go through the middle of the Earth, isn't there?
I
love these. These are fantastic.
Yeah.
You need to write a book of all the conspiracy theories. But those birds, definitely suspicious.
I know. They are a bit, aren't they? But yeah, they are. Apparently, people believe they are surveillance devices for an alien race. So well done, 8-5. You've pulled one back for the guests.
Woohoo!
Well done. Congratulations. We don't feel bad at all. Anyway, Emma, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. I still think it's one of the most important issues we've got at the moment facing us, aside from obviously the direct things that are going on at the moment. So thank you so much for joining us. We can find you on Twitter, can't we?
Yes, I'm at Reef_Scientist. So yeah, feel free to ping me with like questions or anything reef related. I love just talking about reefs and all the amazing animals that you find on reefs. So
Perfect.
Yes,
Perfect.
get in touch.
We'll get that link in the description, and we'll get a few other bits and pieces as well. But for now, thank you very much, Emma. Really appreciate it. Next week we have got Professor Dave of YouTube fame. He's coming on next week. Cats will be back. So we'll see you all then. Goodbye.